Welcome to Stoughton Spotlight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Pickette. We're continuing our Conversations with the Candidates series, where I'll be sitting down and interviewing each of the candidates running for either the Board of Selectmen or the school committee, the two contested races in this upcoming April 2018 town election. On the ballot for the April 2018 town election are 4 candidates running for 2 spots on the Board of Selectmen. And I'm joined by one of the candidates on this episode, Peter Brown, candidate for Selectman. Peter, thank you for joining me.
Jeff, it's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for having me.
So I don't feel that you need an introduction of a new candidate. You're, as of a few months ago, we're on the Board of Selectmen. And I'd like to begin with your reasons for running in this election. As the viewers know, you were recalled on December 5th, and your other 2 fellow selectmen, former selectmen who are on the board, David Souza and Bob Cohn, they didn't pull papers for this particular election. Why are you going for it again?
Well, first I'd like to recognize and acknowledge both David and Bobby, who did a lot for the town of Stoughton, gave a lot of their time and commitment to the town of Stoughton, and we're making some positive changes. The reason I'm running again is because I believe, first off, I believe the recall was more of a power grab. I believe there was an intent to take back control, and that's why the majority of the Board of Selectmen recall unprecedented. But I'm running because I believe I have much more to give to the Board of Selectmen. I don't see any balance on this board. I don't believe it's truly representative of the entire town and the makeup. And I also am a fiscal conservative who believes that we have to get the best return on our tax dollars. So that's why I'm back again, and I believe that getting a seat on the board, I'll be able to make those changes. I'll help.
How do you ask residents to, your strategy-wise, to get past the recall and to look at you as Peter Brown, candidate for 2018's April race, not Peter Brown December? Can you make that different?
Well, I can, because first, and thank you, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the recall because it's in the past. The recall, again, in my opinion, was a power grab. I think that if you're paying attention to things, you could see that. I would ask the residents to look to the future like I am, and it's about moving forward. The recall happened. There's a change in the board. I'm coming back as a candidate because, again, as I had mentioned, those 3 things. And I would ask the residents to support me because I'm an independent voice that is concerned and certainly interested in getting the town moving in the right direction. So the recall's done. It's over with. There's no use to talk about that anymore. It's what we're going to do going forward.
Looking at if you're elected, fitting in with the remaining members of the board, talk about that dynamic of potentially working with, I mean, for example, I know you don't want to talk about the recall, but just the fact you would be serving with Rick Hill, who ran directly against you in that election. So working with the current members of the board if elected.
Well, first off, I will work with anyone who shares my excitement and commitment to the town of Stoughton, because the first priority is the town of Stoughton, and this is exactly why I'm running. Now, there are different members on the Board of Selectmen, 3 that came in on a recall that certainly didn't share or didn't agree with anything that we were supposed to be doing. So I can't help them change their mind. They're running as a candidate, they have to take a position. But I believe that everybody on that board has the equal commitment to advancing Stoughton's best interest and to seeing us get the most, I guess, for our tax dollars, and to make certain that we're improving as a community. So I believe no matter who the 5 members are, it's to the advantage of the entire board to take a look at all the decisions and have different opinions. I honestly don't believe, and I'll speak from watching the last couple months, basically, we were accused of voting in a block, that there was a 3-man board when in fact it was a 5-man board. But I'd argue with that wasn't true at all. In fact, I voted to agree with Mr. O'Regan on the actual recall date. Mr. Souza and Mr. Cohen wanted the 28th of November, and I didn't see why there was a big difference between November 28th and December 5th, so I sided and voted with Mr. Sullivan and Mr. O'Regan for that date. Now, there were decisions or votes that we had taken that I agreed with Mr. Souza and Mr. Cohn. That's just a matter of how it works out. It doesn't mean that everything that they said or everything that we did was I was in lockstep with them. Just like I could now accuse this board of being in lockstep with the chairman. Everything the chairman asked for seems to be some minor discussion, and they all vote 5-0 and maybe on occasion 4-1. So that doesn't show a lot of diversity on the board. I want to see discussion. I think it's healthy to have difference of opinion. It's all right to disagree or agree to disagree, and that in itself provides decent oversight. And right now, I don't see that. So I think it's important for each of us. If I was to be elected, I would approach the issues the same as I always had, independently, and what is the best result at the end of the day for the town of Stoughton.
So going into this election, one of the topics, as it seems to be for many of the elections, is the town manager. And so you played a big part, I should say, in the appointment of the original interim town manager, Stephen Astos. I'd like to get your thoughts on the fact that his contract was not renewed, and then they ended up going with another interim town manager, this time Mark Tisdale, who is the town engineer. So we'll start there, and then we'll go on to permanent town manager. So we'll just, the shift, because obviously you felt very strongly about Stephen Astos. It was something that we talked about at length in the run-up to the recall. So, but just revisit that decision to go in a different direction.
Well, I'll first say that I got the utmost respect for Mark Tisdale. I think he's a great engineer. I'm not aware of his credentials as the interim town manager, but I will say that Stephen Astos was the right decision that we made. And unfortunately, getting to that decision wasn't the most popular way that was done. And that's because we had opposition by two of the members on the Board of Selectmen that fought us on every way. We had employees that were threatened by the town manager that we decided not to retain. In fact, Mark Tisdale was one of them, who was told that if he took the interim town manager's job, he'd be included in the lawsuit. So I find it actually surprising that Mark Tisdale actually accepted the interim job in December based on that itself. But with that being said, Stephen Astos came in and transformed that town hall single-handedly. I believe that he did an outstanding job. And one of the primary, and actually one of the most important decisions and roles of the Board of Selectmen is to hire the town manager and the chief of police. Now, we hired, I believe, an excellent chief of police in Donna McNamara. Mr. O'Regan didn't support that decision. In fact, he opposed it. We hired a temporary interim, Mr. Anastas, who I said was doing an outstanding job. Mr. O'Regan and Mr. Sullivan called for dismissal. They didn't support the decision, and they actually called to terminate him. And I don't know what the process was in December after we were left, but I believe I had heard there only one candidate put in. I know Mr. Anastas offered to stay on, but I don't know if he was considered or not. I really don't know about that. So
my understanding is that he was given the opportunity to apply or reapply for the job and submit a resume, and I don't believe did that.
Well, interesting. Given the opportunity to apply or reapply, we had said the same verbiage to Mr. Hartman when we were looking at it. And by the way, the decision to move on Mr. Hartman was not an easy decision. And these elections have been based on this town manager now for the last several elections. The town manager factors in, and whether we keep him or not. I won as a write-in candidate on Board of Selectmen in 2016 because 4 unions, 3 in particular, fire and police and the DPW, took a no confidence vote on Mr. Hartman. Mr. Hartman, and I know now it was the best decision that we made, the 3 of us made in this regard. And the town manager's position seems to keep coming up in these elections. Now, we hired an interim, Mr. Anastas, and I challenge anybody to do an inventory or interview process with the town employees. He was making some outstanding decisions and doing some outstanding work. He had the place functioning at a high level that I haven't seen since I've been involved in town meeting. I know that there are a lot of issues that we could talk about, but I know that Mr. Anastas was working actually on developing senior living on Rockland Street, the property we had purchased years ago. He, with his finance team, got the $84 million funded and in place for the school and the library. I mean, these are all things he put in good people in good decisions. I mean, in good places. These are all good things that were going on. Now, 2 members of the Board of Selectmen didn't support that. And they talked about process. The candidates that won talked about process. And it's interesting because the process seems to be, well, do as I say, but not as I do type of thing. Because, and the reason I say is, why is there haven't been any research committee or any search committee formed? Now, I'm understanding that there may have been some discussion about that last night.
We're filming, just so the viewers know, we're filming at the end of February, and the most recent Board of Selectmen's meeting on February 27th, they are starting the process of putting out the RFPs for the consultant group to
consultant.
start.
So, Jeff, I have a little bit of problem trying to understand why, when we had a guy that everyone had confidence in, with the exception of obviously Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Anastas, why they had to change and move to put Mark in, who basically refused to accept the job because he was worried about a lawsuit from Mr. Hartman when we had asked him to take it as I was involved in that, but when he was actually asked.
Be that as it may, with the current situation, the next Board of Selectmen will be charged with picking the next permanent town manager. It's very unlikely that by election date there will be a new town manager selected. So that's going to fall on whoever wins the election along with the 3 remaining members of the board. So what will you be looking for in a permanent town manager?
Well, the first thing I'd be looking for is someone who's committed to the town of Stoughton. I strongly believe that the town manager, at the very least, should be living in the town of Stoughton according to the charter. Now, there was some deal made that gave Mr. Hartman the opportunity not to live in the town of Stoughton. One of the things I want to see is department heads, in particular people that are making big decisions for the town, have sort of some skin in the game. So one of the things would be, in addition to the search committee, you'd have to understand that being a resident of the town of Stoughton would be the first criteria. I would not waive a support giving someone the ability not to live in town of Stoughton, because as taxpayers, we make the decisions, and I said this a million times in our meetings. I want people that really want to be here in the town of Stoughton and not just here for a paycheck. So given the opportunity to sit on a search committee, in addition to all the professional requirements and this and that, I would also demand that, or expect that the town manager would be committed to the town of Stoughton. And proof of that would be by taking up residence according to the charter.
Are you willing to, and I think based on the pick for the interim town manager, willing to look outside the box of professional quote-unquote town manager, going into either the business community or going into some other form of profession, if there's somebody who has the qualifications to run an organization? Are you willing to look outside the box?
Well, I think having the qualifications is obvious, but again, the commitment part of it and what the person should have, whoever it may be, should have in mind that the town of Stoughton is what we need to be working on. And yes, I think you could explore and you could go outside the box. Whether it be a nationwide search or a local search. And again, I want to speak specifically about Mr. Anastas, because now if somebody said, well, would you consider him if he put it in his resume? Absolutely, I would. He had 6 years as a Board of Selectmen creating budgets. He had successful business practices by creating companies and managing them. I mean, you're talking multi-million-dollar contracts. He was proven as far as I was concerned. Now, I'm not saying that Mr. Anastas would be interested, but he'd be somebody like Mr. Anastas that I would be looking to hire or to support. And again, he had everything going for him, as far as his professionalism, his credentials, and his commitment to the town of Stoughton.
Next topic I'd like to talk about is actually on your campaign page at Facebook. You had talked about the performance of the Board of Selectmen, and you in part said that they seemed to be inexperienced and unrealistic in some parts. You had some complimentary words as well, but I'd like you to expand upon that. What do you mean by unrealistic? What are they doing that you feel would be unrealistic?
Well, excuse me. First off, I said they were enthusiastic, but inexperienced. I said they were unfamiliar and unrealistic. And what I mean by that is that you have 4 members on the Board of Selectmen that don't have a year's worth of experience. Now, they may have served on other committees, but you have 4 members on the Board of Selectmen that don't have a year experience in Board of Selectmen issues. Not to take away from them doing the job, but their unfamiliar part of it is let's take a look at town meeting. Town meeting organization right now has been, from what I understand, has been dysfunctional. There are requirements that are made. First off, the Board of Selectmen, their budget is to be vetted. There are certain dates, not only mentioned in the charter, but also statutory and required by Massachusetts general law when you have a representative town meeting. And a lot of that is not being done, and that comes from direct inexperience, both at the town manager's office and as the Board of Selectmen. And I'm not saying that town meeting won't go off without a hitch, but it is absolutely not the same as it's been. And some will argue, well, maybe it hasn't been perfect in the past. Well, maybe that's true from some perspective. But the inexperienced part of it is showing. It's absolutely showing, in my opinion. And the unfamiliar part of it is the spendings that they're looking at. There are something that surprises me, that a number of the issues they're talking about, in particular capital projects, are all being conducted in executive session. Now, we're the taxpayers, and the people out there in the town of Stoughton should know what we're invested in. And I don't think it's fair to conduct business behind the scenes and hide behind executive session wording that, it could be detrimental to the purchase of a building, this or that. So
you're specifically talking about they're discussing purchasing certain parcels of property.
Not
or
only
land.
certain, Jeff, but a number of them.
Right.
I don't understand. To me, it seems unrealistic. We have a brand new high school being constructed. We agreed to up to $120-something million. I supported that 100%. We were a new library being renovated and constructed, which, by the way, I want to compliment. I hear the library functioning down in that little square. People really love it. But we have a new library, which I support at 100% and think it's great. And you have a lot of other type of potential capital projects that are going to be taxing to the residents. Now, as I had said to you earlier, one of the things I want to ensure is that we get the most and the best for our tax dollars. Now, when you're throwing around, you want to buy a train station, you want to buy a post office, you want to buy maybe the bank, you want to buy maybe the theater and all that. This is all great stuff and it's all awesome, but I don't call it mandatory, I call it discretionary spending. And there has to be a line. I'm not about, and I don't support, and I will never support, an override. We have town meeting members talking about, well, we need an override. Now, what do we need an override for? We've been meeting, and our budgets have been balanced. In fact, one of the problems I have right now, and I'm not certain many people know about this, but we've lost money. We've lost revenue. Under Mr. Hartman, we lost about $450,000, give or take, for sales tax and room tax. That happened one of the first years he was here. And in the last 2 years leading up to the June that we didn't renew his contract, we lost Chapter 90 money. Now, that's money that we could take the pressure off the taxpayers. The other thing is I'm not about buying property. I'm about selling property. Stoughton owns over 600 pieces of parcels, whether it be land, residential lots, or industrial lots. One of the things that I was doing, and I worked with the treasurer's office and a couple other selectmen and the town manager, was to sell off some of the property. And we looked at just 10 or 9 properties, bringing in anticipated funds of $887,000, which were not even part of they're unexpected, just basically unfound money that would have been added to our budget. Now, that's stuff that still can be done, but you can't do that. And by the way, it benefits 2 ways. First off, you sell a piece of property and then you put it on the tax roll, whether it be through residential or commercial. But if you're looking to buy everything, and it appears downtown, the way to get, or it appears that the chairman's ideas, Mr. O'Regan's ideas to get downtown developed is to buy all the buildings and do that. I believe you need to have a public-private partnership. You can't publicly buy all these buildings and not expect to be a burden to the taxpayers. So that's why I had mentioned unfamiliar and unrealistic in terms of all the projects. Now, again, I'm not saying I don't support some of them. I think some of them are great ideas. I think the train station is wonderful. They'll tell you that there's an agreement to buy the train station for $1. That's not true. That's been proposed in the Senate. But first off, the actual independent keepers of the property would have to agree to it. And number 2, it would have to be approved. Now, I don't know if that's been approved at this point. I'd be willing to bet that it hasn't. It would be great to own that train station. It's historic. It's awesome. And that's wonderful. We buy it or whatever the case is. But now to think that we could buy the Randolph Savings Bank or the post office or this and that, where does this money come from, Jeff? It has to come from the taxpayers, I would imagine. And that I don't support.
Now, one thing that's come up when the board discussed the downtown, in particular, that the Redevelopment Authority had a report that it did back in 2016 and never saw the light of day under the board that you had served on. Now, granted, you weren't the chairman, don't set the agenda, but wanted to ask you, had you seen that report, and why wasn't it on an agenda to discuss before this current board took it up in February?
Well, I know that the Redevelopment Authority was interested in developing downtown or being involved in downtown. In fact, I believe they were involved in taking a no confidence vote. I believe one of the selectmen encouraged that action. I'm all for the Redevelopment Authority being involved. In fact, it was me that tabled the idea of trying to move the project at the Malcolm Parson building along. At one of the Board of Selectmen meeting, we were discussing downtown, and we had a potential developer there. And if you remember, there was a building ready to go, and 2 residents, chairman of the Community Preservation Committee and another resident, prevented that building from being done, basically talking about open space. And there's plenty of areas of open space in the town. We have a huge amount. The bylaws down there are now being currently considered to be changed because every project or anything that's built downtown, you have to have, according to the bylaws, a 10% open space factor. But one of the things that I was supporting was trying to locate 4 spots, not to give to the developer, but to lease to the developer. So we could get that project up off the ground, because supposedly that's what delayed that project 7, 8 years in the making. We had a hole in the ground, and that's the type of stuff, not just talking like people have done on different boards, but actually doing. And we looked at options, and now I understand that project is going to move along. But to get downtown development, I'd welcome the SRA to be involved. Of course, if they're looking to buy all these projects, the town of Stoughton buying all these projects, it's unrealistic, Jeff. I just don't see where you can come up with all that money on top of the money, because people have been telling me, I live week to week. I run a budget in my home. We live by that. We don't have the ability to go to our bosses, my wife or I, and ask for additional monies. There's no additional money. So why is that okay, or should that be okay for the town to go to the taxpayers and say, well, look, because we want to do this or get this, we're going to ask you for more money. And then after they agree to that, because this town has been very generous in agreeing to projects like the school, which is wonderful, and the library, which is even awesome. But where does it end? There are people that can't make these payments now, and that's a concern of mine. I know for a fact that there are people, seniors in particular, and people working hard, people that cannot keep up. And I have to ask, is that a concern of anybody? It is of mine. And when I get on the Board of Selectmen, if I get elected, I'm lucky enough to be put back on there and the people believe in me, I will keep that in mind as we make decisions. All the stuff is wonderful, Jeff. Nobody can argue with wanting to improve things. But how do they get funded? I suggested a year ago, fire station. One of the most important buildings in the town, the Station 1, is deplorable. It's a disgrace that it's in that situation. I was there the other night. In fact, I want to thank them. I got a public endorsement by the Stoughton Fire Department Union, but it's irrelevant in terms of the building situation. We've been talking for years about doing that building, and we haven't. Now, I proposed, and I met with a developer, private developer, who was willing to build the building. And what the talk was, and this is something I hear that gets done, I know the state police did this, lease, we work with the developer, the private developer, maybe try to find some land, make a deal, whatever the case may be. The private developer builds it under all their money, and then they leased it back to us so we can have a brand new building for a fire department. Now, there's some talk that there's some land available on the other side, so I don't know if that's being explored, the fire department building at this point, but that's something I am going to obviously champion, whether I get back on the Board of Selectmen or not, through town meeting. As you know, I'm a town meeting rep, so I'll be looking to push that.
So we have about a minute left.
Oh, my goodness.
I'd like you, in the final minute, I've given all the candidates an opportunity to be able to just give a pitch to voters as to why they should elect you to the Board of Selectmen. In your case, a unique situation of returning you back to the board after having been removed a few months ago.
Well, first off, I'm an independent voice. I cannot be persuaded. I can't be bullied into going along with things just because I got to go along. I think the board, this board in particular, needs more balance. I believe if I'm lucky to get elected, I will work my darndest and I work my hardest to make certain we're advancing Stoughton and our community, because at the end of the day, it's all about great schools and sound services. And that includes a professional police department and a very reliable fire department. People want to make certain your trash is getting picked up, and if you pick up the phone to call the police, they're going to show up. You need an ambulance, they're going to show up, and you want to make certain your children have a great school to go to. So that's what I work, that's what I'll continue to work for, and if you vote for me on April 10th, I hope you will, I'll continue to give my 101%.
All right, well, thank you, Peter, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I'm Jeffrey Pickette. This has been another episode of Stoughton Spotlight, Conversations with the Candidates. Make sure you vote in the upcoming April town election, and check out the rest of our interviews with candidates from the Board of Selectmen and the school committee. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.